The title of my story is The One Story, and for 26 years, that's what I've done, right? I'm an English teacher. I teach stories, and but I teach stories to boys. And when you teach boys, you can't just teach normal stories, right? You gotta teach the hero stories. You gotta teach the stories that are big enough to embrace the capacious hearts of boys. And so I teach Oedipus. I teach, that kick-butt Viking Beowulf, and we teach Arthurian hero stories. I teach Parsifal, Gawain, because these are the stories that feed our spirits. And so I realized that early on in my teaching that my stories had to be big as my boys' hearts. And so I started studying all about it, and my research on hero stories brought me to this guy. His name was Joseph Campbell, and he studied all the stories that ever were. He was amazing. In every civilization, he read all of the stories, and he especially loved the hero stories. And he came up with this idea of the heroic journey. You guys all know it? My guys that had me, the heroic journey. Well, I'm just going to break it down into 3 little parts. So the simplified version, the heroes all follow the same journey, the same path. They have, their known world, and then they depart it. They leave it. They have trials, and especially they go through the belly of the whale. And then they return, and they share the boon. They're the master of the 2 worlds. And I'd like to just use that 3-part structure to tell my story about my spiritual journey. And so we have to go back, and we'll start with the known world. And so my known world is this 65-acre plot of land in Seneca County, and it's called Romulus, and it's Hicksville, USA. It's the place that, as you're leaving Geneva and you're on your way to Ithaca, it'll say, town of Romulus, and you'll drop your phone, or you'll go check your phone, and by the time you picked it up, you drove through Romulus, you missed it, and everything. It's this little speck, and I grew up on a farm, these 65 acres. My dad was a full-time machinist and a full-time farmer. If you grew up on a farm, you want to be where Dad is at, because Dad's out on the tractor, and you want to be out on the tractor with Dad. Dad's in the garage, and he's taking stuff apart and putting it back together and everything. And looking back at my dad, my God, he'd work from 7 to 3, and then he'd come home. And us kids, I've got 4 siblings, 3 brothers and an older sister. We just follow him around like puppies on that farm. Wherever he was, we would be following him around. And then my mom, this fierce Irish woman, she was a homemaker, and her job was storyteller. And so my mom, with all her Irish, she made me fall in love with stories. And she was particularly good with the stories of the Bible. When my mom talked about Moses and his staff, you were there, you could see it. I could see Mary Magdalene with her alabaster jar, because my mom would tell these stories, and she had the Irish in her. And I just fell in love with these stories. St. Francis of Assisi, a lot of animals on my farm. And so the way my mom talked about St. Francis, I was like, wow, these stories, I want them to be me. And then I had my brothers. My sister was older than me, 8 years older, and she left the family when, to live on her own when she was like 17. So it was me and my 3 brothers, like feral children on this farm. And we grew up poor. We didn't know we were poor, though, because when you're surrounded by other people who are poor, you don't know you're poor, And, it was only when I realized, that we used to get state-issued peanut butter. It was in this can, a metal can about this big, and it was nasty. It wasn't even sweetened, and, you had to stir it. All the grease was on top, and you'd make a sandwich with that, and it wasn't until later that I went to other kids' houses, and I, Skippy and Peter Pan. I'm like, oh my God, I have been so deprived. But you don't know that growing up poor. You just know that, your farm is the place to be. And it was the place to be, because all the kids in the neighborhood used to come, because we were like feral children, my brothers, my 3 brothers and I, on this farm. And that place that was heroic living. And so, especially neighborhood boys, I was just included as one of the guys on the farm. And they would come and we would have wars, epic battles. We were living heroically on that farm. And so some of you guys didn't grow up on a farm. There's regular corn, the kind of corn you eat, and then there's this stuff called field corn. Anybody know what field corn is? It's what you grind it up. It's really hard, so when the cobs come fully developed, it's like rock hard. And then it gets ground up and fed to the cows and everything. So the kernels are like rocks on the corn cobs. And so we would have battles. We'd like have battalions of neighborhood boys, and we had the barns and everything, and we'd move through. And here's what you do when you battle. You shuck these really hard kernels off the corn, and you just chuck them at each other as hard as you can. And it's like BBs getting whipped at you and everything. And it was amazing, we would just run all over this farm. There'd be snipers up in the beams of the barns and everything, and it was heroic. It was epic. I was living this hero life, and there were quests like this time of year. This is a pollywog time of year. Does anybody even know what a pollywog is anymore? Those little tiny baby frogs where they're just like a little head and the little tail. And man, whoever could find the pollywogs first, And then there were challenges. So my brothers had BB guns. I didn't have a BB gun. My brothers had the BB guns. And so if you did anything wrong, we had bulls on the farm, and they were in a separate pasture. And my brothers would have their BB guns, and the punishment would be they'd have their BB guns, and they'd stand there at the edge of the fence, and they'd be like, you know what? You have done whatever you've done wrong. Now it's your punishment. You had to run the bull pasture, or they'd shoot you in the eye with the BB gun. And so it was like, oh my God. And so I was living this heroic life. It wasn't just all heroics, though. There were times of great stillness and silence and beautiful moments. The back porch overlooked the back 40 and the pond, and especially like at dusk and everything, just sitting with my mom and just having, whether it's peas or beans, and just sitting with a bowl between us and just shucking peas and just looking out and watching the sunset. And my mom would tell me stories, and I loved that time. Or there was this one time that, when you live on a farm, there's an invisible fence or an invisible sign outside of your farm, and that invisible sign says, drop all unwanted animals here. And so when you're on a farm, everybody drops their animals there, cats and everything. And so there was this mama kitty who had kittens out in the barn, but she was feral. You couldn't get near her, and you couldn't get near these kittens. And so I remember my mom telling me about St. Francis, mystic, like Ignatius, and how he would calm and tame the animals. And so that became my thing. I was going to be like St. Francis, and I was going to tame those wild feral kittens. And so my mom said, you just got to be still. You got to be so still. Just go sit in that, they were in the main barn. Just go sit in the hay and be still, Tracey, and you'll tame them. And I did. It took me days, weeks of just going out to that barn and just being still. And I remember being just about ready to give up and just being still in that barn. And I actually fell asleep. And when I woke up, all of the kittens were in my lap. And I had tamed them. I was just like this mystic. I was St. Francis. And so there were these heroic moments and these quiet, beautiful moments. And I didn't even know that I was being put on a mystical path, but I was. And my mom made me love all of the stories. So of course I went to school to study English and to be an English major. But in the heroic journey, you got to leave this place, right? And so went to college. I was studying literature. And then my junior year, actually my sophomore year, end of it, there was a bulletin at the college saying, write this essay and you can get a scholarship semester to London to study British literature in London and to just study there were different things to study. And I wanted to do that because that was, heroic. And so I wrote the scholarship essay, and I didn't want to go alone, so I wrote an essay for my roommate too, and we both won. And don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. And so I departed this known world. Guys, you have to understand, I had 32 people in my graduating class, and I got a scholarship, and I went to London. I departed this known world to study what I loved, to study the stories. And I have the book here, and some of you guys may have read it. I had a one-on-one seminar with an amazing professor. And I think the beauty of a one-on-one seminar, if you're a professor of college, is that you get to teach whatever you want. And she obviously loved this book, the Graham Greene, The Power and the Glory. Do you guys, anybody? Graham Greene, Power and the Glory, and everything. The tale of just this whiskey priest, this broken servant of what seems to be an unknowable and inscrutable God. And I was just so taken by this story. And I don't know how this other book got in my position, and I had to write an essay about it. And I don't know if I picked this up in the bookstore. I know I got it in London because in 1987, it was £2.50 back then. And I don't know if my teacher gave me this book or if I got it at the bookstore to help me write my essay on Graham Greene. And it's Thomas Kempis, and it's The Imitation of Christ. And I used it to write my essay. And I remember sitting in my flat in London with this book in front of me and some other books. And this is written by a mystic, I think like 1300s. And for the first time, my mom explained St. Francis to me, but this is the first time that I understood, like somebody told me this is what a mystic is. And so, for me, the simple explanation of a mystic is, here you are, and there's God. And most of us, it's you, and then you go to church, and then you find God. But what I love about the mystics and the mystical tradition is here's you, and there's God. And they come, they're deeply religious people and everything, but they're like, whoop, I want my own. They're kind of knuckleheaded, actually. They're kind of stubborn, and they want to have their own personal view. And the cool thing is they experience it, and then they come out, and then they share it, right? And then we learn, too. And I realized when I was writing this paper and, getting to know this mystic that, I wasn't writing a paper anymore. I was like touching something, just like the end of a fabric, right? Or the beginning of a thread of something about the divine, and I wanted to know more. And especially this story, The Imitation of Christ, it's just about this love that you have of your God. And for me, and that became kind of my story, right? That I'm this hero, and I've got this really cool God, and I'm down here kicking butt, and I'm in London. I'm this hayseed hick of a girl, and I'm kicking butt, and I've got this God, and we're this team, and that was my story. So I want to move on to the next part because the hero has to have like initiations and then the belly of the whale. Well, I came home from London, conquering hero. Nobody in my town goes to London and everything. Guys, 3 of my siblings failed out of high school. And, there I was, getting my bachelor's degree, scholarships. And, then I was working towards my master's degree and everything. And I'm feeling like, I got this hero stuff. I got God, and I've got just this power in me and this desire to do great things. And so I'm here, I'm studying. I meet this handsome state trooper, and I've got that going on. I've got this wonderful husband, and then I've got this beautiful warrior princess of a daughter who was born in 1999, my Isabella. And so these are all initiations, right? These are all big things, marriage and childbirth and everything. But they're not the belly of the whale. And so the belly of the whale for me happened a little bit later. And so it was about 6 years later, maybe 5. It was the fall of 2000. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Met the state trooper. I'm working on my master's. Can I rewind that a little bit? I'm working on my master's, and I'm talking to someone, and I heard that there was a job opening at McQuaid Jesuit. And I applied, and I got that job at this place. And I was like, oh my God, what a great place to be, you know, where it's a mystic. It's founded by a mystic, and I get to teach English there. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like the perfect world. And I do have to tell you, can I rewind back to when my dad found out about McQuaid and that I was going to be working for the Jesuits. He was so excited because he was like, you're going to be working for the Pope's Marines. And I was like, ah! And, you know, he had great respect for the Jesuits. And, you know, you have to think about it. And I tell my students, so none of my students pipe in and everything, but, you know, the Jesuits really are out there, you know, at the borders, you know, just pushing the envelope all the time, interacting with cultures and everything. Can you tell me where the nearest Jesuit monastery, you know, the place where you kind of hide away and do your prayer life and everything? Does anybody know where the nearest Jesuit monastery is? No, those aren't Jesuits. Who's down in Geneseo? What? Trappist. So can one of my guys, was anybody listening to me? Where is the nearest Jesuit monastery? One of my guys? Within you. There is no Jesuit monastery. It's in you. It's this, you carry it. The Jesuits carry that monastery. And they've got these cool exercises that you learn this heart, and you learn how to manage this heart, and then you take it out into the world, and you're part of this tradition, the Pope's Marines, and you go out there. And so my dad was so proud, and I was proud, and I was loving this. And it was September of 2000, and it was September 11th of 2000. It was the first day of school. And to rewind a little bit too, I had the warrior princess Isabella. She was about a year old, and she was a little over a year old. I was actually 3 months pregnant. And on the opening day, back when we still had agendas, I was going over everything, and I told my students, you know, this date in March, circle it in March. You know, that's when I'm going to leave you. That's when, you know, the baby's due. And all excited about it and everything. But then at the end of September 11th, that afternoon, I started feeling really sick. And I knew there was something wrong. And I knew there was something wrong with the baby. And I called my husband, and I'm like, just, you know, let's go over to Highland. Let's just see what's going on. And when I got there, you know, they put you on the table, and they put a sonogram machine on you. And my baby was still and silent, and it had passed away. And I'll just never forget seeing a 3-month-old baby. You know, it's fully formed, and it was a boy, and it just looked like this, you know, little astronaut that had just gotten too far from the mothership, just floating there and so silent. And the sad thing is, you know, it was in the afternoon, and they were like, well, there's nothing we can do to help you now. You just need to go home and get some sleep, get some rest, and then come back in the morning, and we can take care of this. And that was such a horrible thing to do to a mom, you know, go home with this still baby inside of you, and spend the night with this baby inside of you. You know, even though my beautiful Isabel's alive and home there and everything. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with this mystic, John of the Cross. He wrote a book called Dark Night of the Soul. And just being that, you don't sleep, you're there. And to be honest though, being with that moment and everything, I never felt closer to spirit as in that time. But being Irish, I told you my mom's Irish, right? I got all the Irish. There was this anger because that wasn't my story. My story was, I'm down here kicking butt, doing things, and you know, looking at me, the first words that come to you probably aren't, oh, she's frail, or anything like that. I'm like, I could carry a baby, did it once and everything, and I just felt very alone. And so, went back the next day and everything taken care of and everything. And you have to know that that's when the Irish kicked in, though, because I had a really hard time with God because that was not part of the story. We were together, and I was doing stuff, and God was with me, and just it totally made me rethink my whole relationship, and I was angry. And so I'm stubborn. I've got all of my mom's Irish, and every single day I would check in with God angrily, and I'd be like, oh, I'm still here, and I'm still angry, and I still don't understand. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Well, about 3 months later, I was pregnant again. I was still angry with God, though. And so I'm pregnant again, and the baby's due the end of August of 2001. Early September, end of August. And every day, even though I have this new baby in me, every day I'm fighting with God. And I'm like, so what's it today? And I was just so angry. Am I going to keep this one? And I had a lot of stubbornness and a lot of, just feelings that, I don't know if I can be right in the world, because now I was feeling a little like that whiskey priest, right? I'm the broken servant of an unknowable and inscrutable God. And I never thought of it that way, but then I did. And so here's the interesting thing. We're coming around to the end of August, and I get it in my head, well, if you are a knowable God, and this is where the story gets kind of interesting, I was like, you will give me my baby on the day you took the other one. But that the baby was due the end of August, beginning of September. And I'm like, no, if you are my God, you will give me my baby on the day the other one I lost. End of August comes, he's Dante, by the way, my son that I delivered. Dante hadn't come. Early September, Dante hadn't come. September 11th comes, and it's like 7 in the morning. My husband was a state trooper. He was out on patrol. And I'm brushing my teeth, and my water breaks. And I have this epiphany. It was September 11th, 2001, the day that I lost the last year, the other baby. I go into labor. And I'm like, score, right? Yeah. Yes, my prayers are. But guys, do you recognize the date of when Dante was born? September 11th, 2001. And so I call my husband, and I'm like, you need to take me to the hospital. And he's like, I don't think I can take you. There's something crazy going on in the world. And I'm like, you better come and take me to the hospital and everything. And so he does. He comes and takes me to the hospital. And that was surreal, going in. And, they were like canceling like C-sections. They didn't know how widespread everything was. There's like sirens going on in the hospital. And there I am. I just want to have my baby and everything. And, for 12 hours, I labored watching a television screen, watching the towers. And, all the nurses and doctors would come in. I'm laying there. I'm in labor. They come in and they start watching the screens of the television. I'm like, over here, over here. And so, guys, talk about, this idea of the mysticism and the divine. For me, that opened up something that, yes, my prayers were answered, but then it was September 11th. And, it was just so... I couldn't put a finger on that at all. I was like, okay. And so that was my belly of the whale. And for me, moving forward in my story, having that moment really framed the rest of it. But it's an interesting thing. You would think that a moment like that would change the way you do stories and storytelling, especially the story of your life. But to be honest, when you have 2 kids and everything, you don't focus on your story as much, right? You're just working full time and you're taking care of your children and everything. And where the parents in the building, in the room, they can attest to this. It's an interesting thing about our story, guys. God sends you people in your life. to kind of challenge and test the story that you're running in your head. And they're the people that you love. And so parents, you can be like, this is my story, and now here's my family. And you're like, wait, didn't you get the script? Because this is my story, and you're not supporting the script, right? And it's like, and then, if you have a son like mine, Dante, it's like, Dante, you're in direct defiance of the script. This is my life. This is my story. And so I want to fast forward, and I want to get to the fall of 2018. And to be honest, the people that I love in my life and everything, man, the story of my life, it seemed like everybody was working against the script for me in that year. And it had been a long haul. Since preschool, there was no academic institution, no container that could hold my son Dante. Like, he just never fit anywhere. And when I started the September of 2018, I was going to try to midwife him through his senior year and just get him through and just get that diploma. It was exhausting. I was exhausted. My daughter was bebopping back and forth between colleges and everything, and watching her and everything. To be honest, my marriage is on its last legs, and I'm like, this isn't my story. I got to the fall of 2018, and I'm like, wait, what happened? This isn't my story, right? The script. Nobody's on script with me and everything. And Dr. Zinda, Damien Zinda, who was here, but now she's stepped out a little bit. She put this book in my hand, and she asked me to do the exercises, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And it's a 9-month deal that you sign up for. Remember, Ignatius is a mystic, and the really cool thing about him is this is like his recipe book. And this isn't these aren't the spiritual exercises. It's a way to go through them. And typically, like, if you're a Jesuit, you'll go away for like a month, right? And you'll do it in one shot. But we lay people, and Mr. Luciano, you're doing it currently and everything. We do it over 9 months. And you have Dr. Zinda. She's your spiritual director. She's meets with you once a week, and you have to pray an hour a day, and you go through these weeks together. And at first, I was, super excited, and I wanted to talk about, everything I learned about yoga and how it relates to Christ and Ignatius and everything. And I just remember meeting with Dr. Zinda and being like, okay, let's talk about the connections and this and that, and all these intellectual things. And Dr. Zinda's like, come on down. How about if you just read the stories? Just read the stories. And I'm like, yeah, but then I want to, put it out here, and I want to have it to be all intellectual. And Dr. Zinda, over the course, it's 9 months, just like a gestation, right? For 9 months, Dr. Zinda kept saying, just come back to the stories. Spend time with the stories. One of the most important stories for me was Mary and Martha. Do you guys know that one? The story of Jesus visiting Mary and Martha. All right, and Martha's like the get it done kind of person. And Mary's like, hey, it's Jesus. Let's talk. Let's hang out. And it's interesting because Dr. Zinda, when you don't get a story, she's like, go back and read it. Go back and read it. And at that time, with everything that's going on, I'm like, Martha, right? Get done. Stuff gets done. And I'm getting stuff done. And she's like, go back and read the story. Go back and read the story. And I couldn't get into the story. You got to use your imagination when you're working with Ignatius's technology. And I just kept going with my Martha. And she's like, go back and read the story. And so I was doing just a meditation, guys, and Jesus came, and I stopped doing. And it was weird because I could see it so perfectly. And Jesus just, in my imagination, the way the story played out, opened up the back door and led me out. And there were 2 chairs. And what surprised me in this meditation was when the back door opened, it was the farm. It was the back 40 with the pond. And Jesus just sat down. And I just sat down. And we just sat together, looking out over the beautiful vista of my childhood. And we may or may not have been shucking peas. And I just spent time with Jesus. And for me, that was a revelation because I realized in my story, I was always seeing Jesus from here. And I realized that I needed to spend time with Jesus and just know him by heart. And my epiphany was, this whole idea of the hero story, guys. My whole life, I was the unreliable narrator. Do you guys know that term? If you're reading something like The Telltale Heart or even The Enchanted, my seniors, there can be an unreliable narrator. Do you guys know what that is? Unreliable narrator. They might be leading you in the wrong direction and, maybe not telling you whole truths and everything. I realized in my story of my life, the story I was telling myself, I was the unreliable narrator because I kept telling myself it was a hero story. And the reality is, all along, throughout everything, being on the farm, that dark night of the soul, it was a love story. All along, it was a love story. It's always been a love story. The love that you have for your God, for the people that are in your lives, the people who change your story, who take you out of the narrative. So that's just all I wanted to leave you with is if you can remember, it's a love story. Everything you do, right? You're writing an email, faculty, when you're writing that email to that parent and everything, and you got to think, this is a love letter. And you guys, you're just writing a lab report. Well, there's somebody receiving that, right? That's a love letter too. Every interaction you have with someone, it's just an opportunity to just be and embody love. And so that's my story, guys. I thought it was a hero story. But all along, it was a love story. That's it.